My stepfather believes he owns the house I inherited from my late father and decided to impose his own rules. So I evicted him and his children, but my mother left with them. Now they're demanding to divide my property. I still remember Richard's expression when I handed him the eviction letter. His face went from bewilderment to fury in a matter of seconds. He crumpled the paper in his hands and pointed his finger at me, trembling with rage. My name is Charles. I'm 28 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I lived with my mother, Helen, my stepfather, Richard, and his 2 children, James and Lucy, in the house my father left me when he passed away 10 years ago. My father had been clear in his will. The property was exclusively mine, although my mother could live there as long as she wanted. Richard entered our lives when I was 16 years old. At first, he seemed like a good man. He treated my mother well and was cordial with me. But everything changed when I turned 25 and began working at a construction company. Suddenly, Richard started behaving like the absolute owner of my house. First, it was small things, moving my belongings without consulting me, using my study for his work meetings, inviting his friends over on weekends without telling me. Then came the prohibitions. I couldn't have visitors after 9 p.m. I had to ask permission to use the garden on Sundays. He even installed cameras in common areas for security. Your father would want me to take care of this house as if it were mine, he told me one day. When I objected, that phrase made my blood boil. My father would never have approved of this man treating me like a tenant in my own home. The breaking point came when I found that he had emptied the storage room where I kept my father's belongings. His books, his collection of antique watches, photo albums of our family, all thrown out or donated because they occupied unnecessary space. Where are my father's things? I asked, trying to control my voice. I donated them to charity. It was time to get rid of that old junk, he replied without even looking at me, focused on his phone. By what right do you touch my father's belongings? My voice trembled. By the right that comes with being the man of this house. You should thank me for keeping this place standing all these years. That night I couldn't sleep. I felt that with each passing day, Richard was erasing more of my father's presence from what was his home, my inheritance. The next morning, I made a decision. I would review the will and property documents to understand exactly what my rights were. The lawyer was clear. The house was legally mine, without conditions or restrictions, except for my mother's right to live there. Richard had no legal right to the property. Can I ask them to leave? I asked the lawyer. Absolutely. It's your property, and you can decide who lives in it, except for your mother. With his help, I drafted a formal letter requesting Richard and his children to vacate the house within 15 days. When I gave it to him, his reaction was exactly what I expected, disbelief followed by fury. Have you gone mad? He shouted. You can't throw us out. This house is as much mine as yours. No, Richard. This house was never yours. It's my inheritance, and I have the documents to prove it. He laughed with contempt. Your mother will never allow this. She'll choose her husband, not an ungrateful child like you. His words hurt me because I knew they could be true. For years, my mother had chosen to keep peace with Richard over defending me. But this time was different. This time I had the law on my side. The next 15 days were hell. Richard manipulated my mother, telling her I was leaving them homeless, that I was ungrateful after all he had invested in the house. His children, James and Lucy, completely ignored me, passing by me as if I were invisible. The most painful part was seeing my mother cry every night, trapped between her husband and her son. I tried to explain to her that she could stay, that the house was also her home. But Richard was always there, interrupting, distorting my words. The day of the eviction arrived. I hired a locksmith to change the locks once they left. Richard and his children removed their belongings in silence, giving me hateful looks. My mother was at the door with a small suitcase at her feet. Mom, you don't have to leave, I said, approaching her. This house is your home too. She looked at me with eyes reddened from crying. I can't believe you're doing this to my family. I'm leaving with Richard and my other children. Her other children? Those words crushed me. After all, I was her only biological child. James and Lucy had never treated me like family, and now my own mother was calling them her children. As she turned her back on me, I watched them leave from the window. For the first time in years, the house was silent. I should have felt relieved, but I only felt an enormous emptiness. 2 days later, I received a legal notice. Richard was suing for half of the property, claiming that my mother had rights to it as my father's widow, and that he, as her current husband, was entitled to that part. He attached some receipts of supposed improvements he had made to the house, portraying himself as the savior of a property that, according to him, was falling apart when he arrived. It was one lie after another. My father had left the house in perfect condition, and I had continued to maintain it. Richard's improvements were actually unauthorized changes he had made to accommodate his family, often destroying original aspects that I valued. The war for my father's house had just begun, and I wasn't willing to surrender. I immediately called my lawyer, Gabriel, a man in his 50s with experience in property law. I showed him the lawsuit and the documents Richard had attached. "This is ridiculous," said Gabriel after reviewing them. "Your father's will is absolutely clear. The house is yours, and your mother's right to live there doesn't transfer to her new husband, much less to his stepchildren." "So why are they doing this?" I asked, frustrated. "Because they believe they'll intimidate you, or that your mother will convince you. Many people prefer to give in rather than face a legal process, especially when it involves family." Gabriel was right. That same afternoon, I received the first call from my mother. Her voice sounded shaky, as if she were reading a script prepared by Richard. "Charles, son, please reconsider. Richard has done so much for us. It's not fair that you now leave us with nothing." "Mom, what are you talking about? The house is mine. Dad left it to me. You can come back whenever you want, but Richard and his children have no right over it. We've lived there for years. Richard has invested a lot of money in improving it." "Improving it? You call throwing away Dad's things an improvement? Turning his office into a game room for James? Tearing up the garden we planted together to put in that horrible grill he never uses?" There was silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear Richard whispering what she should say. "Please, son," she finally continued. "If not for Richard, do it for me. Where will we live now? Richard has an apartment he rents downtown. You can stay there while you find another place. That apartment is too small for the four of us." I was surprised by her response. Richard had never mentioned to me that he had a rental property. Something didn't add up. "Richard has an apartment?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yes, but—" She stopped abruptly. "I have to hang up. We'll talk later." That conversation left me uneasy. I decided to investigate a bit and discovered that Richard not only had one apartment, but 2 other properties that he rented out. The man who complained about having nowhere to live owned 3 properties that generated monthly income for him. When I confronted my mother with this information in our next call, she seemed genuinely surprised. "I didn't know he had more than one apartment," she confessed. "He always told me that small downtown apartment was his only property apart from his business. Richard's business was a hardware store he had inherited from his father. He always complained that it barely gave enough to support us, but now everything was starting to make sense. The expensive vacations, the new car, the indulgences he allowed himself. It had never been the money from the hardware store, but the rents from his properties he had kept secret even from my mother." Meanwhile, the lawsuit continued its course. Richard had hired an aggressive lawyer who tried by all means to delay the process and make me spend on legal fees. His strategy was to wear me down economically and emotionally until I gave in. What Richard didn't know was that I could be tenacious too. My father had taught me never to give up when I was right, and this time I was completely certain. A week after the eviction, James, Richard's eldest son, appeared at my office in the construction company. My colleagues informed me that a young man was asking for me at reception, and when I saw him, I was surprised. We had never had a good relationship, and he was the last person I expected to see there. "We need to talk," he said dryly when I approached. I took him to an empty meeting room, wondering what his father wanted. "He's out of control," he began to my surprise. "He's obsessed with your house. He hasn't stopped talking about it since you evicted us." "It's my house, James, not your father's." "I know," he admitted, leaving me astonished. "I've always known. But my father, he believes he's entitled to it for everything he claims to have invested. He's convinced he can win this case." "Why are you telling me this?" James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Because he's dragging your mother into this and she's not well. She doesn't eat. She barely sleeps. She's trapped between the two of you and doesn't know what to do." I was surprised by his concern for my mother. He had never shown much affection for her. "Look, I don't want conflicts," he continued. "I just want this to end so that we can all get on with our lives. My father won't back down. But maybe we could reach some kind of agreement." "What kind of agreement?" "I don't know. Something like, maybe compensation for the improvements he made to the house." I shook my head. "Your father didn't improve anything. He just changed things without my permission, often destroying valuable memories for me. Still, he lived there for years, and so what? Does that give him the right to claim my property? Am I claiming the rent he should have paid me for living in my house all these years?" James fell silent, but his expression told me I had hit the nail on the head. That was the real reason. They wanted to prevent me from counterattacking by claiming retroactive rent. "Tell your father I'm willing to forget the years he lived in my house without paying a cent if he withdraws the lawsuit and stops harassing my mother with this matter." James nodded and got up to leave, But before going out, he stopped. There's something else you should know. My father has documents that your mother signed years ago, giving him permission to make changes to the house. He's using that as proof that she ceded her rights to him. A chill ran down my spine. Had my mother signed something like that? That same afternoon, I visited my Aunt Martha, my father's sister. She had always been direct and honest even when the truth hurt. Your mother never understood legal papers, she told me when I told her what James had said. Your father took care of all that. After his death, Richard assumed that role. It wouldn't surprise me if he had her sign documents without really explaining what she was signing. But would Mom give up her rights to the house, the only thing Dad left her? My aunt sighed. Helen has always been compliant with her partners. She wants to avoid conflicts at all costs. If Richard told her it was a simple formality, she probably signed without questioning. Her words saddened me. My mother had always been like that, avoiding confrontations, giving in to keep the peace. It was one of the reasons she had never defended me when Richard treated me badly. There's something else, continued my aunt, hesitating. I don't know if I should tell you. Please, Aunt, I need to know everything. Richard has been telling Helen that if she cooperates with him in this house matter, he'll put one of his properties in her name. He's promising her security in exchange for pressuring you. Richard's manipulation was worse than I had imagined. He was using my mother's fear of being left with nothing in her old age to turn her against me. How do you know all this? I asked. Helen called me yesterday crying. She's devastated, Charles. She feels like she's betraying you, but she's also afraid of ending up on the street if Richard decides to leave her. Now I understood the situation better. My mother was trapped in Richard's manipulation, who had convinced her that I was the villain who had left them homeless, while he presented himself as her savior, offering her a security that he had never actually given her. When I returned home that night, I found a notification stuck to my door. Richard had obtained a provisional court order prohibiting me from selling or modifying the property until the lawsuit was resolved. The war for my father's house was intensifying, and I had just discovered that my opponent was not only manipulative, but had been preparing this move for years. The legal notification made it clear that Richard was willing to do anything. I called Gabriel immediately to understand exactly what this order meant. It's a preventive measure, he explained. They can't take your house with this, only prevent you from selling it or making structural changes during the process. It's a common tactic to pressure the owner. What do we do now? Counterattack. We're going to ask the judge to review the documents your mother supposedly signed. If they were obtained through deception or coercion, they will have no legal validity. The next day, as I was leaving for work, I found Lucy, Richard's daughter, waiting for me by my car. Unlike James's surprise visit, her presence didn't seem friendly. My father is going to get this house, she said without greeting. He always gets what he wants. You should know that by now. Did you come just to tell me that? I came to warn you. This fight is destroying Helen. If you really cared about your mother, you would give in and end her suffering. I approached her, keeping calm. If Richard really cared about my mother, he wouldn't be using her as a pawn in this battle. He has 3 properties, Lucy. 3. And yet he wants to take the only one I have. Those properties are his security, his retirement, she replied, although I noticed a hesitation in her voice. And what about my security? This house is all my father left me. It's my inheritance, my home, my memory of him. Lucy looked at me intently. For a moment, I thought I saw a crack in her hostility. My father says your mother ceded her rights to him, she finally said. And you believe that? Do you think my mother would voluntarily give up the only connection she has left to my father? She didn't answer, but her silence was eloquent. She had doubts, too. Look, Lucy, I don't want to be your enemy. I have nothing against you or James. My problem is with Richard and his way of acting. To me, attacking my father is attacking me, she replied, regaining her hostile tone. Don't expect me to take your side. She left without saying anything else. But our conversation left me thinking. Both James and Lucy seemed to have cracks in their loyalty to Richard. Perhaps they weren't completely convinced of the justice of their actions either. That afternoon, Gabriel called me with news. We have a preliminary hearing in 2 weeks. I've requested that your mother be present to clarify the matter of the documents. I don't know if she'll come, I confessed. She barely speaks to me, and when she does, she seems to be reciting what Richard tells her. But we need her to come. Charles, her testimony is crucial. If she confirms that she signed those papers without understanding what they meant, we'll have a solid case. I decided to visit my mother. Richard wouldn't let me into his house, so I asked my Aunt Martha to arrange a meeting at her house. At first, my mother refused, but Martha insisted so much that she finally gave in. When I arrived, my mother was sitting on the sofa, looking tired and nervous. It hurt me to see her like that. Hello, Mom, I said softly. Charles, she replied without looking directly at me. My aunt excused herself to let us speak privately. I sat in front of my mother, searching for the right words. "I miss you," I finally said. "The house isn't the same without you." "Then why did you evict us?" Her voice trembled. "I didn't evict you, Mom. I asked you to stay. I evicted Richard because he was taking over something that doesn't belong to him, something Dad left for me. Richard has taken care of us all these years." "No, Mom. Richard has lived at our expense in my house without paying anything, while collecting rents from his other properties. Properties he hid from you." Her expression changed. "I don't believe you." I took out my phone and showed her the photos of the property records I had obtained. Her eyes widened in surprise when she saw the documents. 3 properties, Mom. And according to these records, he's had them since before marrying you. That can't be true," she stammered, but I saw the doubt in her eyes. "I also know he's promised to put one of them in your name if you help me give up the house." Tears began to roll down her cheeks. I had hit the mark. "I'm afraid, Charles," she confessed between sobs. "What will happen to me if I don't cooperate? Where will I live if Richard leaves me?" I knelt in front of her and took her hands. "Mom, your place has always been with me, in our house, the house that Dad bought for us." My mother cried harder and I hugged her, letting her vent. When she calmed down, I approached the most delicate subject. "Mom, do you remember signing any paper giving up your rights to the house to Richard?" She remained thoughtful, wiping away her tears. "I signed many papers after your father died. Richard said they were to resolve legal matters, taxes. I didn't understand well, I trusted him. Did he explain exactly what you were signing?" "Not really. He just said, 'Sign here, Helen.' And I signed. Exactly as I had suspected. Richard had abused my mother's trust. I need you to come to a hearing in 2 weeks. The judge wants to hear from you about these documents." Panic crossed her face. "I can't testify against Richard. He'll hate me. He'll leave me with nothing." "Mom, you only need to tell the truth. Did Richard explain that you were giving up your rights to the house?" "No, he never mentioned anything like that." "Then that's what you should say. The truth, nothing more." We sat in silence for a moment, and then my mother looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in years. Determination. "I'll do it," she finally said. "But I can't go back home now. Richard would suspect something, and I don't know how he would react. Can you stay with Aunt Martha until the hearing? I can't let Richard know I've seen you. He'll think I'm conspiring against him. Then make up an excuse. Say you need space, that you want to visit Martha for a few days." My mother nodded slowly. "I'll try." As I said goodbye to her, I felt a mixture of hope and concern. I had finally managed to connect with my mother, but I had also put her in a difficult position. The following days were tense. Richard called my office several times, leaving threatening messages. "You're going to lose everything. Your mother is suffering because of you. You can still do the right thing and give up part of the house." I ignored all his calls and concentrated on preparing the case with Gabriel. We reviewed my father's will, the property records. We even found photos of the original state of the house to prove that Richard's improvements were actually unauthorized modifications that had decreased the property's value. A week before the hearing, I received a call from an unknown number. It was James. "My father found out your mother is with your aunt," he said, without preamble. "He's furious. He thinks they're conspiring against him." "How is she? Is she okay?" "For now, yes, but—" He hesitated for a moment. "I think you should know something. I found some papers on my father's desk. They seem to be drafts of documents where your mother supposedly cedes her rights. The signature doesn't look like Helen's." My heart raced. "Are you saying he forged her signature?" "I'm not sure, but it looks strange, and there are several attempts, as if he were practicing." If what James was saying was true, this changed everything. Richard had not only manipulated my mother, but might have committed document forgery. "Why are you telling me this?" "James, I thought you were on your father's side." There was a pause. "My father hasn't always been fair to us either. Since we left your house, he's become obsessive, controlling. Everything revolves around getting this house back, as if it were a matter of pride. I don't like what he's doing to Helen or how it's affecting everyone." "Thank you for telling me," I said sincerely. "Could you get photos of these documents?" "I'll try, but I can't promise anything. My father hardly ever leaves the house now." After hanging up, I immediately called Gabriel to tell him what I had discovered. "If we can prove he forged your mother's signature, this will go from a simple civil conflict to a fraud case," said Gabriel. "But we need that evidence." "And if we can't get the photos?" "We still have your mother's testimony. If she denies having signed those specific documents, the judge will order a calligraphic examination." The night before the hearing, I received a message from James with several attached photos. He had managed to photograph the drafts on his father's desk. Indeed, there were several attempts to copy my mother's signature, each slightly different. I forwarded the images to Gabriel, who responded, "This is gold. See you tomorrow in court." That night I could hardly sleep. Everything would be decided the next day. Either I would definitely recover my house and my mother, or Richard would win, and I would lose the last link I had left with my father. The day of the hearing dawned cloudy, as if foreshadowing the storm that was approaching. I arrived at the courthouse an hour early, nervous but determined. Gabriel was already there, reviewing the documents. "Has my mother arrived?" I asked, worried that Richard had managed to convince her not to attend. "Not yet, but your aunt called me a few minutes ago. They're on their way." Half an hour later, I saw my mother enter accompanied by my Aunt Martha. She looked pale and scared, but when our eyes met, she gave me a small smile that filled me with hope. Richard arrived minutes later, accompanied by his lawyer, and surprisingly, only by Lucy. James wasn't with them. Richard gave me a furious look when he saw me with my mother and whispered something to his lawyer. We entered the room where the preliminary hearing would take place. Judge Anthony, a man in his 60s with a severe expression, asked us to sit down and began by explaining the purpose of the meeting. "We are here to determine if there is sufficient merit to proceed with Mr. Richard's lawsuit against Charles regarding the property rights of the residence located at 247 Liberators Avenue. We will also review the validity of certain documents presented as evidence." Richard's lawyer, a man in an expensive suit with a rehearsed smile, was the first to speak. He presented his case confidently, showing the supposed document signed by my mother. "As you can see, Your Honor, Helen, widow and current wife of my client, ceded her residential rights and accepted that Mr. Richard makes significant improvements to the property, becoming a legitimately interested party." Gabriel listened patiently, taking notes. When it was his turn, he rose calmly. "Your Honor, the defense maintains that these documents are completely fraudulent. Mrs. Helen never understood what she was signing, if she actually signed anything. We have reason to believe that her signature was forged." Richard's lawyer immediately protested. "Objection. That's a serious accusation without evidence." "The evidence will be presented now," replied Gabriel, showing the photos that James had sent me. "These are drafts found on Mr. Richard's desk, where he is clearly attempting to replicate Mrs. Helen's signature." The judge examined the images carefully, while Richard became visibly nervous. "Where did you obtain these images?" asked the judge. Gabriel maintained his composure. "From a confidential source who feared for the integrity of this process, Your Honor." Richard's lawyer jumped from his seat. "These images could be manipulated. We demand to know their origin. The court will order an examination of the original documents," the judge decided. "Meanwhile, I would like to hear from Mrs. Helen about these supposed documents she signed." My mother stood up with trembling hands when the judge asked her to approach. I saw Richard give her a threatening look, but to my surprise, my mother walked with her head held high. "Mrs. Helen, do you recognize this document?" asked the judge, showing her the paper where she supposedly ceded her rights. My mother examined it carefully. I recognized the header. It looked similar to some papers that Richard asked me to sign years ago, related to property taxes. But he never explained to me that I was giving up my rights to the house. "Are you saying you signed without reading?" I trusted him. "Your Honor, after my husband's death, I was lost. Richard offered to help me with legal matters. He would present me with documents and tell me where to sign, assuring me they were routine procedures. And this signature? Do you recognize your signature here?" My mother leaned in to see better, and then shook her head. "No, that's not my signature. I make my E's differently, and my signature never ends like that." Richard's lawyer intervened. "Your Honor, after so many years, it's understandable that the lady doesn't remember exactly how she used to sign." "I have my current ID with me," replied my mother with a firmness that surprised me. "Can you compare my signature?" The judge requested her ID and compared it with the signature on the document. Even without being an expert, the differences were evident. "I will order an immediate calligraphic examination," the judge decided. "I also want an investigation into the origin of these images that show possible forgery attempts." Richard looked increasingly agitated. He leaned towards his lawyer, whispering something urgently. The lawyer seemed to be trying to calm him down, without success. Suddenly, the doors to the room opened and James entered. Richard looked at him, stunned, as his son approached the stand. "Your Honor, I'm James, Richard's son. I took those photos, and I can confirm their authenticity." A murmur ran through the room. Richard stood up, furious. "Traitor! How dare you?" "Order in the court!" demanded the judge, striking with his gavel. "Mr. Richard, control your behavior, or I will have you removed." Richard slumped back into his chair, defeated. Lucy, sitting next to him, kept her eyes fixed on the floor, as if ashamed. "Young man, are you willing to testify under oath about the origin of these images?" asked the judge. "Yes, Your Honor," James responded firmly. I took them 2 days ago from my father's desk, where I found several drafts attempting to copy Helen's signature. I can also confirm that my father never explained to Helen that she was signing documents to cede her rights to the house. That's a lie, shouted Richard, unable to contain himself. She knew perfectly well what she was signing. Mr. Richard, this is your last warning, the judge said severely. If you continue to interrupt, I will have to have you removed. Richard's lawyer, seeing his case crumbling, tried one last strategy. Your Honor, regardless of the validity of these specific documents, my client has invested considerable resources in the property over the years, significantly increasing its value. It would be unfair not to recognize his contribution, Gabriel counterattacked. Your Honor, we have evidence that the modifications made by Mr. Richard were not only unauthorized by the legitimate owner, my client, but actually decreased the property's value by eliminating valuable original features. He presented photographs of the before and after of the house, showing how Richard had eliminated classic architectural elements, torn up the professionally designed garden to put in a cement grill, and subdivided elegant spaces to create poorly constructed additional rooms. Furthermore, continued Gabriel, if we're talking about economic compensations, my client would be within his rights to claim retroactive rent for the years that Mr. Richard and his children lived in the property without paying a cent. He quickly calculated a figure based on market value, which turned out to be considerably higher than any supposed investment Richard might have made. Richard completely lost control, jumped to his feet, and began to shout, "This is a conspiracy! They've bought off my own son! Helen, tell them the truth. Tell them you voluntarily ceded your rights to me." The judge ordered the officers to restrain him. As they escorted him out of the room, Richard continued to shout threats, now also directed at James. "You'll pay for this. You'll all pay for this. That house should be mine." Once order was restored, the judge ruled to suspend the hearing until the calligraphic examination was completed, but he made his preliminary impressions clear. Based on what I've seen today, there are serious doubts about the validity of the documents presented by Mr. Richard. If forgery is confirmed, this will go from a civil case to a criminal one. Meanwhile, the order preventing Mr. Charles from disposing of the property is lifted, and his right as the sole legitimate owner is maintained. When we left the room, I felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I hugged my mother, who was crying silently. "I'm so sorry, son," she said between sobs. "I should have supported you from the beginning. Your father would be so disappointed in me." "Don't say that, Mom. What matters is that we're together again now." James approached us, uncomfortable but determined. "I want you to know that I regret all of this. My father, he wasn't always like this. Something changed in him in recent years. He became obsessed with possessing things, with demonstrating his power. Thank you for your courage today," I said sincerely. "I know it couldn't have been easy to testify against your own father." "It wasn't," he admitted, "but it was the right thing to do. Helen didn't deserve to be manipulated like that, and you didn't deserve to lose your father's house." I noticed that Lucy was watching us from a distance with a conflicted expression. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away and hurried out after her father's lawyer. Gabriel approached, putting away his documents. "This isn't over yet, but we've taken a big step today. The examination will confirm the forgery, and then Richard will have much more serious problems than losing this lawsuit." "What will happen to him?" my mother asked, concerned. "Despite everything." "It will depend on whether we decide to press charges for forgery and fraud," replied Gabriel. "That will be a decision you'll have to make, Charles." I didn't have an answer at that moment. Part of me wanted Richard to pay for all the harm he had caused, but another part just wanted to end this whole matter and move on with my life. As we left the courthouse, we found a light drizzle. My mother clung to my arm as she used to do when I was a child. "Can I come back home, son?" she asked in a trembling voice. I hugged her tighter. "It never stopped being your home, Mom. Let's go back together." The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotions and changes. The calligraphic examination confirmed what we already knew. The signatures on the documents didn't match my mother's. Richard now faced possible charges of forgery and fraud. Gabriel presented me with the options. We could file a formal complaint, which would likely send Richard to prison, or we could use this as leverage for an agreement that would end all his claims on the house. After much reflection and after discussing it with my mother, I decided to opt for the second option. Not out of compassion for Richard, but because a criminal proceeding would be long and painful for everyone, especially for my mother, who, despite everything, was still legally his wife. "We can offer not to press criminal charges in exchange for him signing an acknowledgement that he has no right to the property and commits to not bothering us anymore," suggested Gabriel. "Do you think he'll accept?" I asked, doubting that Richard's pride would allow him to give in. With the evidence we have and what he's facing if we go to criminal court, he'd be a fool not to. His lawyer will surely advise him to. Indeed, Richard's lawyer contacted Gabriel the next day, requesting a meeting to discuss a possible agreement. We agreed to meet at Gabriel's office, neutral ground. Richard arrived alone, without his children. He looked different, with bags under his eyes, unkempt, with several days' growth of beard. The fury had given way to a kind of bitter resignation. "My client is willing to renounce any claim to the property," his lawyer began without preamble, "in exchange for not filing criminal charges for forgery. We also need a written acknowledgement that he obtained those signatures through deception," replied Gabriel, "and a commitment not to contact Charles or Helen without their express consent." Richard, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. "Where will Helen live? She's still my wife." "That's her decision, not yours," I replied firmly. "And given that you have 3 properties that you hid for years, I don't think you'll have trouble finding somewhere to live." I saw a flash of the old anger in his eyes, but his lawyer put a hand on his arm, silencing him. "My client will accept your terms," said the lawyer, "but requests to be able to retrieve his personal belongings that are still in the house. He can send a list of what he considers his," replied Gabriel. "Charles will review the list and will agree on a day for him to pick up what's approved, accompanied by a neutral third party." While the lawyers finalized the details, Richard stared at me. "Your father would be proud," he said, in a tone I couldn't interpret. "You've always been like him, stubborn, loyal to your family." I didn't respond. I didn't need his validation or his comparisons with my father. I knew I was doing the right thing, and that was enough. When we finished the meeting, Richard approached me while the lawyers were exchanging documents. "How is Helen?" he asked quietly. "She's fine. She's recovering from all of this." "Tell her," he hesitated. "Tell her I'm sorry about how things turned out. If you want to tell her something, write her a letter. I'll deliver it to her, but I warn you she might not want to read it." He nodded slowly and left without another word. It was the last time I saw Richard in person. The agreement was signed the next day. Richard legally renounced any claim to the house, acknowledging that he had manipulated documents to try to take possession of it. In exchange, we didn't press criminal charges against him. My mother decided to start divorce proceedings. It wasn't an easy decision for her after so many years, but she felt it was necessary to move forward. "I never realized how controlling he was," she confessed to me one night as we were having dinner in our house. Now quiet and peaceful. "He always said he was doing it for my own good, that I didn't know how to handle financial or legal matters. And I believed him. It's not your fault, Mom. Richard is very manipulative. But I should have been stronger, more independent. Your father never treated me like that. He always considered me his equal. He consulted me about everything." That night, for the first time in years, my mother spoke at length about my father. Stories I knew and new ones, details of their relationship, anecdotes from when I was little. It was like recovering a part of him that had been dormant during all the time Richard was in our lives. 2 weeks later, we received news from James. After testifying against his father, the relationship between them had completely broken down. Richard had disinherited him and kicked him out of his house. James was looking for an apartment to rent. "Do you think we could help him?" my mother asked, surprising me. After all, he helped us when we needed it. She was right. We offered James the basement that I had converted into my personal space, now that I had moved back to my old room. He accepted gratefully, promising it would be temporary while he found his own place. Living with James turned out to be surprisingly easy. He was respectful, helped with household chores, and even started helping me with some renovation projects I had planned for the house. My mother seemed happy to have him around, as if in some way it compensated for the absence of Richard and Lucy. Speaking of Lucy, she took a different path. She decided to stay with her father, although she occasionally communicated with James in secret. According to him, she also had doubts about what Richard had done, but her family loyalty was stronger than her sense of justice. A month after the agreement, we received a letter from Richard addressed to my mother. As promised, I delivered it to her without opening it. She read it in private and never commented on its contents to me. But I noticed that after that, she seemed more at peace, as if she had closed a chapter in her life. The divorce proceedings were moving slowly. Richard wasn't contesting it, but he wasn't making things easier either. My mother, however, showed a strength I hadn't seen in her for years. She took personal finance classes, became more involved in managing the house, and even got a part-time job at a bookstore in the neighborhood. "It's never too late to start over," she told me when I asked why she had decided to work at 55 years old. "Your father always said that economic independence was the foundation of personal freedom. Now I understand what he meant." Meanwhile, I continued with my job at the construction company, but with a new perspective. This battle for my father's house had taught me the importance of valuing what we have and protecting it. I began to take more interest in legal topics related to properties. I even considered studying law in my spare time. One day, While going through old photo albums with my mother, we found original plans for the house that my father had kept. I realized that some of the modifications Richard had made had significantly altered the original structure, eliminating architectural details that my father had especially valued. "Your father spent months designing this house with the architect," my mother recalled, caressing the plans nostalgically. Each detail had a purpose, a story. That's when I decided to undertake a project to restore the house to its original design, recovering my father's vision. Thanks to my contacts at the construction company, I was able to get materials at a good price and professionals willing to help me in their free time. James, surprisingly, offered to collaborate. He turned out to be good with his hands and eager to learn. We worked together on weekends, tearing down the walls Richard had added, restoring moldings, reclaiming spaces. "I never understood why my father insisted on changing everything," James commented one day, as we were sanding the frame of an original door we had found in the garage. "Now I see that the house was already perfect as it was." My mother also participated in her own way, researching the original colors, materials, even contacting old friends of my father who might have photos of how the house was before. During one of these restorations, we made an unexpected discovery. When removing a false ceiling that Richard had installed in my father's office, we found a small metal box embedded in the original wall. Inside were documents, letters, a small notebook that turned out to be my father's diary. My mother cried when she saw it. "I didn't know he kept a diary. David was always reserved with his most intimate thoughts." We decided to read it together that night after dinner. The pages were full of reflections on life, on his love for my mother and me, his hopes for our future. The final entries, written when he already knew he was ill, spoke specifically about the house. "This house is my legacy for Charles," he had written. "It's not just a roof, but a symbol of everything I've worked and dreamed for. I hope that someday he'll share it with his own family, that he'll fill these rooms with laughter that I won't get to hear. Helen can live here as long as she wishes, but the house must be Charles's. He will know how to honor its history and build his future on these foundations." These words confirmed what I had always known, that defending the house wasn't just a matter of property, but of honoring my father's memory and wishes. A few days later, we received an unexpected visit from Lucy. She was nervous, clearly uncomfortable, but determined. She had left Richard's house after a strong argument. "He's changed," she explained to us as we had coffee in the kitchen. "He's become bitter, obsessive. He keeps talking about this house, about how it was stolen from him, that one day he'll get it back." "Did he send you to spy?" James asked, suspicious. "No," she replied firmly. "I came because I need to get away from him for a while, to clear my head, and because—" She hesitated for a moment. "I wanted to apologize, especially to you, Helen. We treated you very badly." My mother, always compassionate, took her hand. "We all make mistakes, Lucy. The important thing is to recognize them and learn from them." We offered her to stay for a few days, until she decided what to do. At first, living together was tense. Lucy and I had barely exchanged kind words in the past, and mistrust doesn't disappear overnight. But over time, she began to integrate into our small community. One afternoon, as we continued with the renovations, Lucy found me looking at old photographs of the house. "It was beautiful," she commented, looking over my shoulder. "I don't understand why my father insisted on changing it so much." "I think he needed to erase my father's presence," I replied, "to make his own what never belonged to him." Lucy nodded thoughtfully. "He's always been like that. He needs to control everything, to possess it, including people." For the first time, I had a sincere conversation with her. She told me what it was like growing up with Richard as a father, the high expectations, the punishments when they didn't meet his standards, the constant manipulation. "James was always more rebellious," she explained. "I tried to please him, to be the perfect daughter. Only now do I realize how toxic it was." To my surprise, Lucy decided to stay longer than expected. She found a job at a nearby cafe and began contributing to the household expenses. She also joined our restoration project, showing a special talent for decorative details. 6 months after the legal agreement, the transformation of the house was almost complete. We had restored the original structure, recovered the open spaces that my father had designed, even rebuilt the garden according to the original plans. Only one element was missing, the large stained glass window that adorned the main staircase, which Richard had replaced with an ordinary window. Finding an artisan capable of recreating that specific stained glass seemed impossible, until my Aunt Martha remembered that my father had commissioned the original design from an old friend of his, a master glassmaker who might still be active. Indeed, Henry was not only still working, but had kept the original sketches of the stained glass. He agreed to recreate it for a reasonable price, as a tribute to the friendship he had had with my father. The day the stained glass was installed was special. The sun's rays passed through the colored glass, projecting a mosaic of lights on the entrance floor, exactly as I remembered from my childhood. My mother cried when she saw it, saying it was as if a part of my father had returned to the house. That night, we organized a small dinner to celebrate the completion of the renovations. We were all there. My mother, my Aunt Martha, James, Lucy, even Gabriel, who had become a friend as well as our lawyer. It was an evening full of laughter and memories. "I toast to David," said my Aunt Martha, raising her glass, "to his vision, his legacy, and to the family he managed to create even after his departure." We all raised our glasses, united at that moment by something stronger than blood or legal documents, respect for my father's memory and the home he had built. The next day, we received news about Richard. According to Lucy, he had sold 2 of his properties and was planning to move to another city. His obsession with our house seemed to have diminished, replaced by the desire to start anew, away from the memories of his defeat. My parents' divorce was finally finalized. My mother, now legally single, seemed to have rejuvenated. Her job at the bookstore was her passion. She had made new friends, had even started taking painting classes, a hobby she had abandoned when she married Richard. James decided to return to university to finish his architecture studies, inspired by our restoration project. Lucy, to everyone's surprise, became interested in law, impressed by how Gabriel had handled our case. As for me, the fight for my father's house had deeply changed me. I understood that sometimes defending what's right requires confronting even those who should support you, that the true value of an inheritance isn't in its market price, but in the memories and principles it represents. A year after the agreement with Richard, the house had not only regained its original splendor, but had also filled with new life. It was no longer the battlefield of a family war, but a home where different people had found refuge and purpose. One afternoon, as we were having coffee in the restored garden, my mother asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Do you regret evicting Richard?" I thought for a moment before answering, "No. I'm sorry you had to go through all this, but I don't regret defending what my father wanted for us." She nodded, contemplating the flowers we had just planted. "I don't regret it either. Sometimes we need to lose something to realize what truly matters." At that moment, with the setting sun illuminating the garden my father had designed, I understood that our battle had been for something more than bricks and land. It had been to preserve a legacy, to honor promises, to reclaim not just a property, but our dignity and autonomy. The house my father had left us was finally ours in every sense, not just legally but spiritually. We had fought for it, restored it, and now we were filling it with new memories, new dreams, new possibilities. And that, more than any document or property title, was the true value of my inheritance. 3 years have passed since we completed the restoration of the house. Life has followed its course, bringing changes I could never have imagined when this story began. My mother continues to work at the bookstore, now as a manager. She has flourished in her independence, forming a circle of friends and dedicating herself to her own interests. Sometimes I catch her looking at old photographs of my father, no longer with sadness, but with a kind of serene gratitude for the time they shared. James graduated in architecture and now works at a prestigious firm. He recently bought his own apartment, but continues to visit us regularly for Sunday dinners, which have become a tradition. Lucy finished her first year of law school with excellent grades. She dreams of specializing in family law to help people in situations similar to what we experienced. Although she moved to a university residence, she considers our house her second home. As for Richard, we know little. He moved to the coast as planned and, according to a mutual acquaintance, has rebuilt his life with a new partner. Sometimes he sends cards to James and Lucy on their birthdays, a small gesture of reconciliation that they have decided to accept, while maintaining a prudent distance. I continue working at the construction company now as a project manager. Last year, I met Laura, an architect specializing in the restoration of historic buildings. Our shared passion for preserving heritage united us, and 3 months ago, I asked her to move in with me to my father's house. Sometimes when we come down the main staircase and the morning sun shines through the stained glass, projecting that mosaic of colors on the floor, I think about everything we've lived through to get here, about how what began as a battle for a property ended up redefining what a home truly means. The house I inherited from my father continues to be legally mine, but in a deeper sense, it belongs to all those who have found refuge within its walls, to all who have contributed to restoring not only its physical structure, but also its spirit. And perhaps that was always my father's intention, not just to leave me a building, but a place to build connections, memories, a full life, a legacy that goes far beyond property documents. If you've made it this far and enjoyed it, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to bring more incredible stories. Thank you very much and have an excellent day.